first of all, thank goodness we're not freezing in Davos. Much prefer San Francisco. As Jim said, you are two of the leading researchers, strategists, pollsters in the country. You've spent a lot of years working for parties on both sides of the aisle. So we're so grateful to have you with us and to have your work on this particular information, especially with an important election coming up. I want to start with, why did you do this poll? Why did you choose who you chose to speak to, and what are you hoping to take away from it? Kristen, I'll start with you.
Well, the reason why we wanted to do this research is because we think that children and families are an issue that there's often not a lot of research out there that dives deep into what's really going on with them, what are their needs. We've worked in the world of political polling a long time, and oftentimes issues like this will be covered at a very surface level. We wanted to go deeper, and we also wanted to make sure we were highlighting the voices of young people themselves. So by having a component of this research that actually talks to American adolescents, we think we're adding an extra layer of information onto what we can know about the state of children and families.
And I have 4 kids, 11 and under, and I totally agree. There isn't information out there, I think, enough information for parents, especially about how children are feeling. So Celinda, talk to us a little bit about how you did the poll, because I think a lot of folks say, well, I didn't get asked, my kids didn't get asked. Like, where is this information coming from?
Yeah, so this is a really great, bold poll, and it's the most comprehensive poll that we know of out there right now. And one of our goals was really to set the agenda. It's voters nationwide and a very robust sample that allows us to look at subgroups like African Americans, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islanders, young people, Generation Z. And then, as Kristen mentioned, we reached a sample of 12 to 17-year-olds as well. And we really wanted, this is the most comprehensive, comparable survey of young people on issues that are facing them. We really wanted to bring that voice forward. We looked at parents and non-parents, and we looked at people online. We also texted them. And so it's a very, very comprehensive survey that got hard to reach young people and was very comprehensive in its approach.
Now, I think a lot of people think, well, you know, young people don't vote, but I was actually looking at youth voter turnout in the 2020 presidential election, age 18 to 29. It was fairly high, 50%. Like, is that a good number?
So you wish it were higher, but
Right.
at the same time, depends on if you're comparing young people to older people, or if you're comparing young people today to young people, say, 20 years ago. And certainly we are seeing Generation Z is paying much more attention. And what makes me so excited about studying the views of adolescents in this research is, even though they are not old enough to vote, we know that young people are now beginning to pay more and more attention to issues than they were a decade or two ago. They're more exposed to it, whether it's through the internet, social media. They are more aware of what is going on in the world around them, and so those views are beginning to form a little bit earlier. So studying what they're thinking about the world around them gives us interesting insight to what they may do once they do become part of the voting electorate.
Okay, so we're going to walk through some of the takeaways, and then we're going to talk about why it matters, because clearly we're all here because we believe it matters. We just have to get other people to agree. So first, number one, Celinda, the economy is at the center of people's concerns, and when they think about the economy, they think about kids and families.
Yes, I think this is literally the most important finding of the survey, because when both of us talk to politicians or elected leaders, they'll say, well, Celinda, that's nice, but everybody kisses babies and it's for kids, and nobody means it. And it's the economy. What this data says clearly is the economy is about kids and families. And there are 2 pieces of data that are really important. One that we'll show you here, 2/3 of parents say that when they're talking about rising costs, when they're talking about inflation, they're talking about how difficult it is to afford things for children. The second piece of data that is really, really important is that voters are immensely concerned about children. And some of the concern is even higher with non-parents than parents. We'll hear the data that, well, parents are all concerned, but non-parents aren't. Not true. People think that our children are going to have a worse future, and they're very focused on investing in children. They want people to be sincere about what they're proposing. And as the Children's Hospitals used to say, they're trying to discern who's really for kids and who's just kidding.
And I believe we do have some slides to show you, so hopefully we'll get those up. Number 2, across the board, kids, young adults,
Oh,
parents,
yeah, we should
voters.
move I'm sorry, this slide that we can see should be moved up.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Voters across the political spectrum say politicians are failing America's kids and families. Kristen, tell us about this one. There you go.
Yeah, so we've got some more data, and if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, that takes a look at whether people, voters as well as kids and teens, do they feel like political leaders are responding to them? And look, the reality is that nowadays, a lot of people don't feel that politicians or many big institutions are responsive to them or listening to them.
Right. I was wondering what it would be for
It
adults.
seems particularly acute when it comes to younger people. And frankly, it's because of something that Celinda mentioned. They don't necessarily vote. And so oftentimes you will find political leaders gravitate to, what's it going to take for me to get reelected? Well, the reality is to get reelected, you need to be doing things that voters are looking for, and they want you to focus on children and families. And so even though a 13-year-old is not necessarily going to be turning out at the ballot box for you, that 13-year-old has people in their lives who do vote and who do care about their welfare and do understand that it's getting much, much, much tougher out there these days to raise a family, to be a teenager. And so when we ask, even the kids and teens, they generally say, 6 in 10 say politicians are not really reflecting my needs, desires, and experiences. But that's even higher among voters than it is among the kids and teens that we surveyed. So there is a real sense that this is the country's future is young people, and they deserve to have their needs met. And just because they can't vote for themselves doesn't mean that politicians should be neglecting what they need. And we hear that come through loud and clear in this data. In particular, what Celinda mentioned as well, it's not just parents either. It is non-parents. It is voters who we don't conventionally think of as the kind of folks that are going to be prioritizing these issues are the ones saying, I worry about my grandkids. I worry about the things that I'm seeing in the news. I'm worried about how the world has changed and how much harder it is to raise a family these days. And this makes me concerned long-term about what does this mean for the American dream. So this is, I thought this was very striking because it is a concern that it's not just kids and teens saying, oh, please listen to me. It is voters overall and not just parents saying this really matters.
All right, another big takeaway, strong bipartisan desire for the government to invest in and support families and their economic and caregiving needs. Kristen, this is something we were just talking about backstage.
Yes. So I'm amazed. I have a 19-month-old, and I have another one coming in a couple of weeks. And becoming a parent has been very eye-opening to me at a personal level about how even if you have a lot of resources at your fingertips, being able to afford things, find good childcare is just an incredible, almost impossibility for so many. And I feel that myself personally. And so doing the survey and feeling less alone was very interesting. If you go to the next slide, we've got some data here about what people think about things like the child tax credit, which right now in Washington, a very robust debate going on that is not just Republicans versus Democrats, but actually interesting debates within the party around these issues. And my message to my fellow Republicans back in Washington is the child tax credit is enormously popular. We found 79% of Republicans in our survey say that they favor the child tax credit. This is something where you have on the right, there's a divide. Some Republicans kind of take this very libertarian perspective where they're torn between wanting low taxes but also not wanting the tax code to be too complex. But a lot of Republicans say, our society is built on families. Making it possible for families to thrive is the basic foundation of everything else we want as a society to be built on top of. And so making that possible is key. And so that's why you see this nearly 8 in 10 Republicans saying they support the child tax credit. And we don't just find it around child tax credit, but we also asked a number of questions in the survey about just investment generally. And you may think, well, Republicans hear that word investment, and they kind of know that means government spending. But even so, in this survey, the idea that we should be doing more government spending when it comes to the needs of children and families, there's a lot of stuff that Republicans may think is waste, is unnecessary. This is not it.
Moving on, Celinda, mental health, it is huge. A huge, huge challenge for young people.
It is a huge challenge. And if we look at the next slide, What's really interesting about mental health is, first of all, it is in crisis. And, excuse me,
Bless you.
allergies are in crisis too. But for teens, it's the number one problem out there. 76% say that it's a problem. Here you see people not thinking. 65% of kids and teens think the mental health of their young people it's not good in their communities. And voters are divided on this issue. It is young people who really brought mental health to the table. And now, young people in particular, and young voters, add mental health as a solution to almost any problem. If you talk about education, in this survey we did, it's one of the number one policies that people want. If you talk about homelessness, one of the number one solutions that people see. What's really interesting is that people have a very broad-based agenda when it comes to mental health. Young people have succeeded with voters in America. I don't know how much they're succeeding. It's yet to be seen with elected officials in America. But whether it's insurance coverage, providing services in schools, increasing the number of mental health workers, attaching mental health to crime policy, homeless policy, housing policy, you name it, young people are very, very, very committed on this issue and have brought the issue to the public. And as Kristen said in other meetings that we've had, this was one of the most astounding findings in her mind. The last thing I'll say is mental health is a bipartisan issue too. 75% of Democrats think that we should increase access to mental health in schools. 61% of independents, 61% of Republicans agree, and even more Republican women. So this is an issue that has really hit the agenda, and I think the public policy response, frankly, has not met the voters' intensity.
This is really interesting because I just went to my son's middle school orientation for my oldest child, and the first people that we heard from were the school counselors.
Wow.
Then we heard from the tech department, and then we heard from like the math and the science and the history teacher, and I was like, wow, times have really changed.
Wow.
That said, Kristen, something else that you found is that education is critical, but schools are not up to the task, so the people you polled think.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide where it really lays out, okay, we know that whenever you ask voters, how do you think education is doing in the US, they will say, oh, I don't think it's doing very well. That's not new. What is new is now we're seeing more and more people who have kids in schools expressing concern about their own kids. And you used to have this dynamic of I hate Congress, but I love my congressman, and you would kind of find that with schools too. And we're seeing that begin to erode. So if you go ahead to the next slide, it shows a little bit not just about what people think is wrong in our schools, but what is going to be necessary to fix it. So we said, to what extent do you think each of the following are a problem in our schools? And we know there is a ton of data out there that tells a really troubling story about things like learning loss coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that that was such a major disruption at such a sensitive time of life for so many young people. And we see that 6 in 10 Americans or 6 in 10 voters in our study, as well as teens and young people, for them in particular, it's 6 in 10 teens and young people who say, yeah, we think that COVID-19 was a problem for sure. But you know what else we think is a problem? Bullying, including cyberbullying, mental health just in general. So there are lots of headlines that will talk about the struggles on the academic side in terms of reading and math scores coming out of COVID-19 and how we have struggled to build back from that. But for young people, they're saying, yes, that's a problem, but don't just look at that. You have to think about this holistically. To what extent am I getting the academic skills I need? To what extent am I getting the life skills I need, the career skills I need? And none of that is possible if I feel like I can't cope, if I feel depressed, if I feel anxious. And for many of these young people, this is from a different study I did. I did a focus group with the New York Times of young women about mental health. For some of them, they think it's because young people today are just more comfortable talking about these issues, that mental health was a challenge for previous generations too. We just didn't talk about it in as candid and open a way as we do now. But they were also very clear that the pressures, especially from things like social media, the internet, that this has really dramatically ramped up the challenges of being, say, a teenager in America. And you see that shining through kind of loud and clear in this data. So anytime you want to think about how can we make the education issue more of a priority and what do we need to do about it? Yes, make sure kids can read. Yes, make sure they can do math. This stuff all really matters, but it all has to be built on a foundation of, do kids have the skills to engage with one another and engage with the world around them, and do they have the sort of mental health supports necessary to learn how to read, to learn how to do math? These things are all very intertwined, and that's what young people are telling us in this data.
Now, lastly, and most importantly, people think we're in crisis, and less than a majority believe that things will get better in the future. I mean, that's kind of depressing, speaking of depressing.
Very depressing, and it's super different from previous times. If we look at the next slide, people don't think that things are good for kids now. 58% of voters think it's just fair or poor. 63% of kids say it's just fair or poor. But the really telling data is this slide, because Americans are always optimistic about the future. They're optimistic. That's why they came for the most part to this country. That's why I come from Montana. People moved west. Things are always going to get better. They were always going to get better for their kids. In a focus group we had, one woman said, if you worked really hard, you could guarantee a better future for your kids. Now you're struggling to barely get by. And we asked people, what is the future like? Less than half of moms of kids and parents of 0 to 18 and parents of kids 19 to 24 say they believe their children will be better off in adulthood than they are now. That is a fundamental violation in people's minds about what this country is supposed to be about. This is where there's real anger. And if you look at those tallest green bars, the non-parents are more pessimistic even than the parents. 54% of non-parent women say kids are going to be worse off, not just the same, worse off. This is a rebellion in the works. And one of the things I think that is most important about this study is not you as the audience, but carry it forward. Elected officials have no idea of the intensity of concern about the public, about kids and families. This is a central theme for our times, and it should be a central focus for both parties in the election.
Now, both of you are going to be working hard over the next 10 months, on both sides of the aisle, and I think the real question is, how do we get people, policymakers, to listen? Kristen, on the Republican side, often when you talk about kids, the narrative shifts to like banning books and sometimes gender. What do you make of that, and how do we get these particular issues to break through?
Well, there is certainly evidence that there are concerns that are under the hood of the overall worry about the state of children and families that do look different from right and left. But there is also a lot that unifies. And especially if you are someone who is running for office and you are looking for a message that reaches across party lines, that can both fire up your side and reach out to those with whom voters who might think they don't agree with you on a lot of other stuff. Focusing on this issue is key. I think the thing that makes it so potent is that we often think, at least in polling and political terms, we'll think of like there's economic issues, there's social and cultural issues, and these are all different buckets of issues. And what this survey really reminds me is that these things are very intertwined, that our social fabric is built on children and families being able to thrive. And there are economic consequences. There are economic policies that need to be in place to make that possible. There are consequences to the future of our economy if we're not making those investments, and the workforce of tomorrow isn't getting what they need if kids are not being set up for success in the future. So yes, I don't want to dismiss the idea that everybody agrees on everything in America. Celinda and I both look at data all day long. If you ask Republicans and Democrats, is the sky blue? Like, you're not going to get the same answer in the poll, right? But there is a lot in this survey that is very unifying, and I think that's very positive.
And Celinda, you have obviously such rich institutional knowledge here. You've been polling going all the way back to the Clintons. Like, is this issue going to break through? Like, what lies ahead for the next 10 months?
Yeah, it's really, that is the key question. It has broken through already with the voters. And voters right now think the politicians and elected officials have been a complete failure. The young people think they're not being listened to. If you're an elected official out there, or if you're a candidate running for office, and you want something that speaks to where people are at, what their concerns are, you would be talking about these issues. If you want to talk about the economy and you want to talk about the number one economic issue out there, it's children and families. And if you want a bipartisan issue, you're right. Democrats and Republicans would be divided about the color of the sky today. what is ironic is they are not divided about this. There are some aspects that are clearly divisive, and if you talk to candidates, they would think that everything, just like you did, is banning books and gender equality. What's really central here, mental health, teachers, cyberbullying, investment in kids, more healthcare and mental health providers. These are not controversial topics with the public. You want to, any three people in America agree on more than politicians do right now. You want to come together? This is the agenda the public is together on.
Any predictions for November? Are we all just...
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you both so much. Kristen, Celinda,
Thank you.
so grateful to have you both here
Good job.
today.